extensive, yes.
All right, so with that, I don't know though if I just found the memo or the actual report. The document I just found by Google was a memo. It's 20 pages. Do you want?
Yeah, that's it, Christine.
Oh, okay, I'll send it out.
Perfect.
Okay, just give me a second. I have to just, okay. I'm sending it out now. Okay.
Hi, Commissioner.
Good morning, Counselor. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Did you guys were just going to answer questions and talk about progress, or did you have a presentation? You didn't have a, right?
No, there's no presentation.
Excellent. Okay.
A brief opening remark, and then we just want to restart the conversation and move it forward.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Morning, Councilor Braden.
Good morning, Councillor Edwards. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Whew.
I'm going to give a couple more minutes for maybe start at 10:05 to give some of the colleagues to sign on.
Fine, no trouble. It's a beautiful morning out there.
Yeah. Hi, Chris and John. How are you?
Good morning, Counselor.
Good morning.
Counselor.
Hi, I take it you guys, again, no presentation, just here to answer questions and progress, things like that?
Yep.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Sorry.
We'll just give it till about 10:05 and then we'll start. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. We got a lot of work before us, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Tuesday, July 14th, and we are here today. Excuse me, sorry, my head. It is Thursday, July 16th, 2020, and we're here today for a virtual working session on docket 03. Oh, sorry, I opened up the wrong opening statements. Sorry, Christine, I apologize. I'm trying my best. I'm so sorry. Open up the wrong ones. That's what I get for having two working sessions on major stuff in the same.
Do you have?
Yeah, no, I do have them.
Okay.
I apologize to everyone. I wish I'd memorized the opening statement and all the other stuff, but I have not been good at that. 1 second. Did everyone get the Sullivan and Worcester report though in the meantime?
Got it.
Okay. That was not included in the original documents, but I feel if we're going to refer to it, we should have that. All right. Second take. Good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards. I'm the Chair of the Committee on Government Ops. Today is Thursday, July 16th, and we're here today for a virtual working session on docket 0233, petition for a special law regarding an act relative to the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm the sponsor of this docket and was referred to the committee on January 29, 2020. The committee held a hearing on this matter on February 25th. In accordance with Governor Baker's executive order from March 12th, we're modifying the requirements for open meeting law, and therefore we're having this working session virtually via Zoom. This enables us to continue our responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations. The public may watch this meeting via live stream via www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. Will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8/RCN82/Verizon 1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all counselors. So I'm going to stop there very quickly and acknowledge my colleagues who are here and also just briefly describe how we're going to approach today. The first, we've been joined by my colleagues, Councilor Liz, in the order of their arrival, Councilor Ed Flynn, Councilor Michelle Wu, and Councilor Liz Braden. Is Ed still here? And so we will approach this, allowing my colleagues to have any opening brief remarks, but this is a working session. And so we're going to get to the work of that. And the goal is to get a home rule petition, or at least as much comments about the home rule, the legal language that we'd like to send to the State House, certified and finished. But also, because of the process that we're in, we did have a hearing. We did have an executive order was released by the mayor as well that took, I would say honestly, took a lot of the practical suggestions in the home rule petition to heart and responded accordingly. So there are certain things that have already been acted upon or being acted on by the city. And I want to thank the administration for doing that and just taking the leadership. And myself and Liz Braden were actually at the signing of that executive order. So we will get an update after we discuss the legal components. We have a comparison chart between the home rule and the executive order and what's left for us to deal with. So that's what we'll be discussing. And then we'll go into the executive order updates and concerns and what's going on, what's not going on. There were a lot of things happening. And also we'll deal with questions asked at the previous hearing. I have minutes from that to also have the administration deal with that. But I think it's very important that we have real comments on the final product that is going to come out of this working session because of the deadline at the State House. I intend to have this voted on July 29th at our next City Council hearing. So I will now turn it over to my colleagues for any opening remarks that they may have, brief again, so that we can get to the substance of the matter. So Councilor Flynn, if you're still with us. Oh, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. The only comments I have, I'll be very brief. I just want to say thank you for the administration staff for being here. I know there's been great progress on this issue. Want to say thank you to the mayor's team. I want to say thank you to my colleagues at the city council and central staff as well for working on this important issue. And I'm looking forward to this discussion and learning more about it. Thank you, Council Edwards, for your leadership.
Thank you. Counselor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have much for an opening statement. I'll just wait for my turn for questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then Counselor Braden.
Ditto, Councillor Wu. I will just hold my questions later. Thank you so much for all involved. This is a really important piece of legislation to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for folks at home, representing the administration today is Commissioner Dion Irish from ISD. We have Chris English also from ISD. No, I apologize, Chris.
Yeah, no, he is.
I am at ISD now, Counselor.
Okay, yes, so you are at ISD. My apologies. We have Attorney John Towell, and we also have Attorney Edward Coburn. Did I get everybody? I hope so. Okay, and they'll be answering a lot of the questions that we have today. So before we get into it, I wanted to bring us back to how much work has actually been going on, and also just summarize some of the questions my colleagues had at the previous previous hearing. A lot of the questions were around the process, specifically around translation. I think Councillor Flynn specifically was curious about the transparency, the process, being notified, and also making sure it's in more than one language. Councillor Flaherty was talking a great deal about the zoning, the buffer zones, and whether there was room for changing those to make them bigger. Councillor Arroyo specifically was talking about, again, the notice requirements for the process and for the hearings, not only just language but timing. I specifically asked about the frequency of the meetings. In many cases, I felt that having 100 cases was not a sufficient, nor was it truly a deliberative process, and that we needed to consider weekly meetings for the ZBA. Councillor Wu was specifically concerned about how a project is or isn't included on the timeline, what decisions are made for deferral, what decisions and how they're made for the extension. Also, I don't know that we got a complete conversation about the audit report that was put out specifically from the city, and I'll let Councillor Wu continue that questioning today. And then, sorry, that was Councillor Baker specifically asked about the timing and how much time ZBA members have to even deliberate or think about the projects. And there were just several, and Councillor Braden was also concerned about the standards for the variance, why there's so many given out. And also was upon the vein of having some sort of transparency about how many per neighborhood were given out, so that we're very clear about that. And that's something I did ask for in the home rule petition. So if I mischaracterize any of your questioning, colleagues who are on the Zoom, please feel free to supplement. But I wanted to make sure that we continued our conversation. I believe Councillor Asabi George is also trying to sign in. Let me just make sure. There we go. Councillor Asabi George.
Morning. Thank you very much. I'm here now and looking forward to the rest of today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Councillor George. So in short, those are the summary of our process thus far, our questions thus far, and also where we are in terms of trying to get this home rule done and voted on in the next week. Does anyone specifically from the administration or from my colleagues looking at the home rule petition now, looking at the language in the home rule petition, have any questions or concerns? Actually, let me rephrase that. I want to be more direct. Let's go to the comparison document. That will actually help guide this. Everyone should have a copy of the comparison document between the home rule petition as proposed and the executive order, which took care of a lot of things. And also there are certain things that are just not able to be taken care of in an executive order. Does everyone have that? Counselor Sabi George, did you get a copy?
Thank you, Counselor Edwards. I'm looking for it now.
Okay, I'll just let everyone pull that up. In the meantime, I understand, Counselor Wu, you may have some time limits. I didn't know if you wanted to go ahead and put some questions out now or before we go into the comparison.
I think you go ahead with the comparison and
Very well.
I'll wait because it's not directly related to that, so I don't want to derail the conversation.
Very well. Thank you, Counselor Wu. So now we're dealing again, we have a home rule petition and executive order, and a lot of the things in the home rule petition was taken care of in the executive order, or at least addressed in the executive order. And we'll get to the updates on those. So the major, if you'll look at it, the first thing, oh, we've also been joined by Counselor Flaherty.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Technical difficulties over the last 10, 15 minutes. Sorry, I'm joining a little late.
Counselor Flaherty?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. It came in pretty
Very good.
awful, but you sound okay now. Counselor Flaherty,
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry for joining late.
we're focused on the comparison document that was sent out earlier between the home rule and the executive order.
Okay,
Okay,
got it.
okay, very well. So,
Let me pull all that.
so the major difference between the executive order and the legislation is that the legislation intends to add additional seats or change the members of the ZBA. That can only be done by the home rule petition. It cannot be done by executive order. We've also been joined by Counselor Bach. Sorry, just making sure she's in. Very well. Flaherty and Bach. So that is no real, there's no difference in the executive order or in the home rule petition about that. As many will recall, the home rule petition looks at expertise in the environmental and city planning, having a tenant perspective, having someone knowledgeable in zoning laws, and having all of that available. The executive order does not and cannot propose new seats, but does support board training on a regular basis, so that the board members are brought up, I think it's on a quarterly basis, brought up to speed on all the zoning changes in the neighborhood and understanding what they mean. That was prompted by the confusion about the buffer zone between marijuana dispensaries. That was brought up because there was confusion about whether a neighborhood is in or out of the iPod, and making sure there was comprehensive continued education. The next component was about electronic filing, electronic records, and electronic notice. I proposed in the legislation, administration responded by essentially adopting most of the recommendations and providing a timeline to implement them, being able to file online, records being able to be searchable online, and allowing people in the neighborhood to find by their neighborhood what's being put up. Being able to sign up to receive electronic emails and notifications about a specific project. Most important is when it's being deferred, so that you don't show up and take time off of work and then find out that the project has been moved. And also know when the deferral date is coming up. And then also for ZBA members to receive information the day before the day of the hearing. These were, I believe, all adopted in the executive order. What wasn't, but I still propose and think I would like the administration to answer eventually, is about the quarterly reports on variances. I think myself and Councilor Braden were concerned about having an understanding comprehensively of how we are giving out neighborhood variances, what kinds of variances, down to the neighborhood level. We want, and I still want, the administration to commit to that. It's in the home rule petition if you won't, but I do think it makes sense. We should know what's going on. And also it helps to know if it's just FAR versus height, and if we're going to look at zoning going on. Financial disclosure, one of the biggest concerns in the home rule was conflicts of interest, financial interest being involved, and that the So I required initially that the board, anybody coming before the board would actually make a public statement of interest, explaining their ownership interests, especially for the many people who come under the shield of an LLC or under the shield of a corporation. We wanted to be very clear about who is actually buying and getting the variances in our neighborhoods. The executive order responds by requiring board members, which I hadn't thought about, actually to do statements of financial interest, which I think was great, but also directs the city to change the zoning code standard for thresholds for applicants. Right now, if you're under Article 80 and you're a large project person, you are required to already give this information to the city. And the city is going to lower that threshold so that folks who are coming before the ZBA that are large projects will be giving out this information. Mine was a blanket for anybody. There was a concern about how that, you know, the average homeowner putting a dormer on their house shouldn't be included in that. And so I think the city put in a limit of at least $10,000 being earned on the project. That's a difference. Additional conflicts of interest. My legislation removes the conflicted parties, removing essentially real estate interests from the board. I also wanted a geographic ban for anyone currently serving on the board. You couldn't be in the business of architect or being in the business of real estate in the city of Boston. I also wanted a 5-year cooling off period so that if you were done with the board, you did it 5 years before you could get back into the industry or vice versa. And applies conflicts of interest also under board staff. The executive order does respond and does come up with conflict of interest. It expands restrictions on the board participation and appeals on former business interests from 2 to 5 years. So adopting the 5 years, but not the geographic ban. And does do a 2-year cooling off period for any business dealings with an adjudicated project following the vote date. So if I voted on my 186 London Shire Street in East Boston on June 1st, 2020, I couldn't deal with and work even in my private industry on that project for 2 years. So that's my interpretation. I believe that's what the administration intended, is to stay away from projects I vote for at least 2 years. So there is no, I made it rich, I voted on this awesome project, bam, I'm gonna turn around the next week, quit the board, and then work on there as a consultant. Am I correct? Very well. I will say many of the concerns were responded to. One concern I had was the standard of a variance. The executive order does not approach that because the executive order cannot. I wanted to actually make the executive order part of the zoning code, and I wanted to change it to at least allow for consideration of several things: impact on the city's goals for generating income restricted housing, furthering fair housing, preventing eviction and displacement, and addressing climate change. At least have these things be asked and be part of the consideration. The executive order does not address that. The 7C of the zoning laws. Okay. Then staff support, accessibility, customer facing reforms also suggested in the legislation. I wanted to create a community council, someone who's neutral, who could be there to help guide people through what many consider a very intimidating, unfriendly process. If you're not in the know, if you're just here having an opinion. The executive order responded with an ombudsman position, which is essentially not an outright attorney, but someone who is there, who is supposed to help guide neutrally both parties or any party who needs some help. This is where you speak. This is the number that you have. This is what happens if you don't win today. This is what happens if you do win today. This is the proceeding process. And we wanted to make sure that that was also available in many languages. ZBA training and internal policies. Both the home rule and the executive order require the board to promulgate some rules. And the legislation, the mayor and the director of the BRA would be responsible for updating the ZBA on changes to city ordinances and and zoning, and the executive order in response to that, they basically said, there will be trainings on a regular basis and would hold meetings on rules within 120 days, which we could talk about those dates, whether the rules actually happen on February 24th, 2020 or June 23rd, 2020. But essentially, we should get some updates on what the training schedule looks like now. Other administrative policy legislative changes, the frequency of meetings, I brought that up. That's still a concern. There's clearly too many on one day. Standards for directing projects to the evening or homeowner in evening meetings, what's happening with the small project review, if you will, on Thursdays. The staffing budgetary request to support this for ISD. The data reporting. And also term limits was something I brought up as well. Since you are appointing them, maybe the council towel or someone or Counselor Edward Coburn could speak to whether we need a term limits in the home rule or whether you can do so outright in the executive order, or the city could do this. My understanding is a term is 3 years. And I think, and my colleagues can agree, disagree, that 2 terms is sufficient. That's 6 years, be able to impact the variances in the city of Boston. Definitely no more than 3 terms, which would be 9 years. So that's the presentation of the comparison of the 2. Major things still left for the home rule. Who should be on the ZBA? The standard for a variance. Those are the big ones for the executive order, excuse me, for the home rule petition. I will now turn it over to if the administration has any summary or some questions, but I'll likely turn it over to my colleagues who may have many questions, because that was a lot of information.
I'd like to say a few words. So thank you, Madam Chair, and to all the other members of the council. We're gracious for this opportunity to recontinue this conversation. As you mentioned, we last spoke about this, I think, February 25th. And as you also stated, that this is something that the mayor is committed to, not just in words, but in action. And that's why the mayor has issued an executive order that addresses many of the things that we're trying to be accomplished through the home rule petition. So the commitment is there on board composition, something that we need to continue to talk about. And we're prepared to do that today. So we are in agreement on disclosures, transparency, training, modernizing the board, reporting. I can answer that question now. Yes, we are committed to doing quarterly reports and even on an ongoing basis to provide open data in addition to better database that folks can access for ZBA cases. So the commitment is there. We're here prepared today to work. This is a working session. I know that there are a lot of questions that we actually weren't really prepared for. We are understanding that today we're working on moving forward to some legislation that we could get agreement on and move up to the State House. But we're prepared to give an update on where we are with the executive order implementation. And I think it may be helpful just to get that out the way so that we can spend time on things that we need to really to get some agreement on, so we can advance our goals here today. And
Happy to do that.
We'll also answer as many questions as we can, but just want to bring that context and understanding that it's been a while since we had this conversation, and a lot has happened and a lot occurs on a regular basis. But with that said, if it's okay, I would like to ask Chris English, who is now Chief of Staff at ISD, to just give an update on where we are with the executive order implementation.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you, councilors. Just for the items that we put in the executive order that had a time limit on when we needed to implement them by, they're sort of broken down into 4 buckets. So the first bucket would be the 120-day requirements. So this would be translation and language access, as well as the appointing of a ZBA ombudsperson. So right now, the translation and the language access, I think we had a somewhat easier time adopting that, given that we've moved to virtual hearings during the response to the pandemic. So right now, for all hearings, we provide the opportunity for folks that need translation assistance, whether that's to provide testimony or to just understand what's going on with the board, or to actually provide a presentation to notify the department in advance that they would need translation assistance. And then we will provide that during the hearings. So that's provided in all of the notices that we send out to abutters, that we post online. So that's available, and we're working on expanding that capability through our digital platform to provide real-time translation. So that's something in addition that we're looking to do. But right now, if somebody does need some assistance with translation, we're able to provide. As far as the ambassador position is sort of what we're referring to it as. We have appointed somebody as a ZBA ambassador that's there at least an hour beforehand on hearing days to answer questions that folks might have about, how to testify, or when something's coming up on an agenda, or how to access information about board proceedings. That ambassador person is also there throughout the entire hearing to answer questions, to help facilitate testimony from the public as well as presenters. And they're available, throughout the week, before and after hearings as well. So that's both of those items. I think we've accomplished sort of what has been contemplated in the executive order, and we're looking to expand those capabilities beyond. The next sort of time item is scheduling a business meeting with the board to discuss written policies and procedures. That was due on the 22nd of June. We held a meeting with the board, a public meeting, to discuss a written policy and procedure document June 16th. Solicited input from the public as well as board members. We're working on updating that to incorporate the feedback that we've gotten, with the goal of having that voted on and adopted formally by the board in the coming weeks. Our next deadlines are coming up next month. This would be primarily technology related. So the online application and payment for appeals, the application itself has been developed. The technology is there. We're beta testing it right now, but both the payment and the applications are ready to roll out as soon as we confirm that all the capabilities work for just the technology side of it. Electronic testimony is something we've also adopted. This is both written, it's provided, sort of by default through our virtual hearings. All of that testimony is, what we would consider electronic, but we provide folks the opportunity to send in written or taped testimony in advance of hearings, and those are read into the record when a case comes up before the board. So the electronic testimony is available. We also have a few weeks left before we petition the zoning commission on changing the thresholds for reporting. I think we're working with the BPDA on that as we speak, and our goal is to have that done before mid-August. Finally, our 18-month turnaround, our electronic plans, electronic notice, and a comprehensive ZBA database. So the city in general is in the process of developing a enterprise level e-plan solution. So not only for ISD, but for departments across the city that use plan review. We are on track to have that developed and implemented before next year. So moving that right along. Electronic notice is something that we're doing now, in addition to paper notices that are sent out, that are mailed. But we're also expanding the information that we're putting up online as far as notices and data. So we have a fellow working from Do It this summer on our ZBA data, cleaning up things and getting ready to put a project tracking system online available for constituents and applicants, similar to what you find with the BPDA board. where you have project information, various steps in the process that it's at, opportunities to submit comments. Our goal is to have something similar for the CDA. While it's a much larger universe of cases, we think we can accomplish that pretty comprehensively, I'd say. We are in the process of hiring additional staff that were approved in the FY21 budget for the CDA. So some clerk positions and an additional paralegal. We're also
sorry to interrupt. Councilor Flaherty, I note your hand is raised. We are going to go through questions in order of arrival right after he's finished.
Okay.
Continue. I'm sorry.
And we're also in the process of bringing on some additional management analysts for ISD's internal IT team to work on CDA technology related stuff. So I think we're on the right track. We're cutting down a lot of the items that were in the executive order, and we're on track to complete all of these by the various deadlines that are put in there. So.
Very well.
I just want to just add one more thing to what Chris just said, just to expand a little bit more on what we're doing for hearings. Currently, we are having weekly hearings with an agenda that provides more time for deliberation. I think they've been going well and getting better week by week. We are planning to go back to our regular schedule of having every other week, but we're still an agenda that's much lighter than what we had before. But we also plan to add an additional hearing per quarter. Thanks for approving the budget. There are new staff members dedicated in that budget. We expect to have bodies in those positions actually maybe by September. And when we have sufficient staffing, then we do plan to, going forward, look at going back to a weekly schedule that would be more easily accomplished with the additional staff than it is to sustain right now. So I just wanted to give an update on that as well.
Very well. Just some quick questions then from me, and then I will go in order of arrival. The translation assistance, how do people know to sign up for that?
Right now it's on the notices that are mailed out to abutters, as well as the notice that's posted online for the hearing. So it includes a phone number, an email address, and a web link that someone could use to sign up for the translation assistance.
Very well. And then you noted that there are the rules and regulations or standards from the board will be voted on by the board. Were they ever made available for public comment or at least consideration?
They were in advance of the hearing on the 16th.
On the 16th, okay. Can you work with Christine to coordinate that for all of the colleagues who may not have seen them, including myself?
Certainly.
Thank you. In terms of the staff member who's the ombuds person, is this a regular, like full-time staff person dedicated to this job, or is this kind of a rotating in person from ISD?
So it's a full-time ISD staffer, but right now it's the assistant commissioner for constituent services.
Is that Ms. Johnson?
Aisha, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Miller now.
I'm sorry?
Her name is Miss
I call her
Miller.
Ms. Johnson. You can call her. I call her Ms. Johnson. So just to be clear on that, the difference. I mean, I appreciate responding to the home rule petition, but the way I saw the home rule and the way I saw that position was someone who is there. That's their kind of their job, and maybe it's not a big enough job, but who is and it is consistently there. Will someone be replacing Aisha? Is it going to be Aisha's or Ms. Johnson's number one? I'm concerned about continuity of standards, a continuity of friendliness, continuity of understanding the process. And so how do you assure that the person who is behind that desk, who is there, is meeting this same kind of standards, understands that the entire goal is about, neutrality? How do you do that if you are rotating people in?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't envision that Ms. Miller will be doing this in perpetuity, but we do understand that even though there is positions budgeted in our new budget, that it'll take us some time to actually hire those people. So when we do have additional staff, which we expect to do so by September, we'll be able to use our regular staff. That it may still not be one person, but it will be a small team that would be in part of that rotation.
And just to be clear, this person is not, unlike with, ONS who is there, who is representing the administration, and that's fine. This person's job is not to be the representative of the administration. They are supposed to be the representative of the process.
Exactly. That's correct.
That means a lot to me. The annual report, financial disclosures, when is the ZBA members going to start to do that?
We have a date on
That's
that?
also part of the executive order.
I don't have a date for you right now, but I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
I know that we had to do ours this year in June. I think that we should have a date for when the financial disclosures are done.
See, typically it is June for myself as well, so I envision it'll be June as well for ZBA members.
Well,
But we'll get back to you on that.
just to push back, you know, this executive order was done in February. So this June should have been when they got or done or something, some sort of financial disclosure. So I think this year.
I understand, but a few weeks after the executive order, we did shut down for the pandemic. I'm sorry, but it's true. I have to share that. And so we actually paused ZBA and we were focused on critical services, and now we're resuming and we're recovering. And so I would have to say that did affect that timeline.
Understood. I understood. I'm not denying that. Can I get a commitment that it will be done this year, and then
Absolutely, yes.
And then going forward every June?
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay. You noted that you were going to file the required zoning language to lower the threshold. My understanding is by mid-August, you said you're filing that with the zoning commission?
That's the goal, yes.
Okay. And we will have an opportunity to commit or comment on that as well, because that'll be part of a different public process.
Of course.
Okay. The electronic notice. So if I am going to direct a butter to whatever, I'm going to get in my notice physically in my house something that says I can sign up for translation, and something that on the same notice, something that says I can sign up for electronic like updates as well. Am I correct?
Right. So right now the notice is hard copy mailed to abutters, but it's also posted online, but it has the information on where to sign up to testify, a phone number and an email address that are dedicated to answering questions about the board or specific cases. And the goal moving forward is to have an email subscription type system where you can sign up directly online for either a particular cases across a certain neighborhood or citywide cases moving forward. So you get email notification of those. So in addition to being an abutter to a particular project, we'll expand the ability to get notified of hearings moving forward.
I think that's great. And then the quarterly reports of the variances given out. I don't think the executive order addressed that. I understood Commissioner Irish, that's something that you guys are not opposed to, or maybe I'm incorrect, but I think there should be an annual assessment of what's happening in terms of the variances.
Yeah, that's not something we're opposed to. As Chris mentioned, we do have a summer fellow actually from the Department of Innovation and Technology who's working with us on ZBA data. We should have a report from them in about a month, and from there we can provide a timeline as to what the dates are. But we're certainly supportive of not only of providing quarterly reports, we want the data to be available on an ongoing basis.
Okay, I appreciate that. Those are my questions. Councillor Flynn said he's okay. Going to confirm with that. Yep, still good, Councillor Flynn? He may have gone. Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate everyone's time and appreciate your leadership, Councillor Edwards, for continuing this. We are now, I think, 5 months from the last hearing or the last working session on this. So I just wanted to follow up on a few things asked last time to see if there were more answers, but also just start with the kind of state of the current ZBA membership now. So could someone, and maybe it's Commissioner Irish, just tell us the names of the current board members and which of the pathways towards appointment that they represent?
You're muted, Commissioner.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Counselor, I'm gonna ask Chris English, Chief of Staff, to provide that information, please. Did you hear me? Hello?
Yep, I was just pulling up the names here, sorry. Right now, we currently have Mark Ehrlich, who is appointed through the Building Trades Council. We have Mark Fortune, he's through the Building Trades Employers Association. We have Christina Ruggio, who's a mayoral appointee. We have Joe Ruggiero, who's also a mayoral appointee on behalf of a neighborhood organization. We have Tyrone Kindell, who is an alternate member appointed through the Boston Building Trades Council. We have Kerry Walsh, who is an alternate. Sorry, that's a filed appointment. Ed DeVoe, who's an active alternate member from the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. So those are our active members. And then there are several that are in process.
And what about Nadine?
Nadine is no longer a member of the board.
Okay, so I'm just cross-referencing this with the public website. Okay, so we've had Mark, Christine, Mark, Carrie, Tyrone, Ed DeVoe, Joe, Ruggiero, Nadine. Okay, so that means, so could you just verify that's 1, 2, 3, 4 active members and 2 active alternates? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And could you just remind everyone what the procedures are in terms of quorum and when can, when we're at quorum or below quorum, what can happen in terms of the petitioner's ability to defer, et cetera?
Certainly. So we need 5 members for a quorum. And you need at least 5 votes to approve a case moving forward. So if there are only 6 members seated, it requires nearly a unanimous vote for something to get passed. So applicants may request a deferral if there are not a fully seated board. Does that answer your question?
Fully seated meaning for that meeting or in general?
For that meeting,
Okay.
but right now it's in general since there are only technically 6 board members.
Wait, could you go over that 6 again, Chris? I'm so sorry. I had 5 on my list. Can you just say the names one more time? I just want to be 100% clear.
Sure. Mark Ehrlich,
Mhm.
Mark Fortune, Christina Ruggio,
Mhm.
Joe Ruggiero, Tyrone Kindell, and Ed DeVoe.
Oh, okay, so you're basically saying that the alternates are already bumped up, effectively bumped up to full members because of the shortage.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then just in terms of the, and I had Commissioner Irish and I had a conversation about this leading up to the budget vote in terms of the sort of backup that this might create and the impact on cases. So when petitioners are requesting deferrals, et cetera, that just means that later ZBA meetings the agenda just gets longer and longer.
Right.
Okay. And then just to clarify, so the City Council has in the Planning, Development, and Transportation Committee, I believe it is, let me just double check the docket numbers. I believe it is 5 dockets for consideration and potential confirmation.
Yeah, I believe there are 4 awaiting confirmation.
4,
waiting,
1,
okay.
Eric Robinson, Konstantinos Ligris, Kerry Walsh Logue, and Tim Burke.
Okay, so 1 person has withdrawn then? Because there's an additional docket that is still live that was filed in October of 2019. But my understanding is that that person is no longer interested.
No, that person is still interested.
Oh, okay. Ms. Beha?
No, I have another person here from October 2019, Timothy Burke.
Okay, we have another, there was another request for confirmation from that date also from someone that was not just listed.
Okay, so it is 4.
Okay.
Not 5.
Okay, and so, I just want to be clear on my part that as chair of that committee, I wholeheartedly agree with the push that Councillor Edwards is making now to look at the structure of the board and how that influences business, particularly because of the relationships that we have seen play out with the federal investigation and subsequent ones, but that we're a little bit caught in a situation where I believe, I think there's questions that have been unanswered. I'm happy to go back through some of them. If it's easier, I'm happy to put it in writing and submit it as the council moves towards consideration to help relieve this stressful situation that the board members are under of being right at quorum and sometimes below. So I know we discussed a little bit about the executive order and its implementation. Could we just review very quickly the Sullivan and Worcester reports recommendations? There were 42 of them in the appendix, and how many and which of those have been implemented?
So I need to go through them one by one, right? Is that okay?
And Councillor Wu, just for time purposes, if we maybe, I don't know if you have a specific question about them, I'm happy to come back on the Sullivan Worcester report, but I did want to get to other folks' questions about the executive order versus the home rule. Happy to come back to this though, or happy.
If over the next person's questions, Commissioner Irish wants to make a count or something like that, we don't have to do it sort of live in the moment, but I would like to know which of the 42 recommendations have been implemented.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll have to report on that. It actually would be easier if we could just go through this afterwards and provide a report. Otherwise, I'd need to go through this in real time and give you an answer.
Okay, I want to note that I had asked a series of questions 5 months ago at our hearing and did not receive any follow-up on any of those answers. And so now I'm looking to have to follow up on those. So I would love that. I would appreciate that very much, but it feels that we're asking the same questions over and over again to no avail.
Councillor, to hopefully to find a balanced approach to this issue and quandary, as we're going through the additional council members kind of questions, I do think it's worth somebody from the administration at least going through and at least marking up some of the 42 things that you've acted on or have not acted on while we're doing some questions. There's 4 of you guys on today. I'm sure someone can take the time to go through that while we're asking other questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That would be wonderful.
Thank you. And so just to continue on with the questions. So again, I'm asking the administration while we're dealing with this, and 3 can answer the questions and somebody can go through that report. We will come back for a second round and hopefully by then we'll have some updates. Councillor Braden.
I don't have any further questions at this moment. Thank you.
Very well. Councillor Sabi George.
Sorry, slow to the button there. No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just sort of my longstanding issue is making sure that when a matter is deferred, that the abutters and the local neighborhood association receive additional notice. That's always been this is really an issue from the previous administration and the roost that they used to run with deferrals. So my hope is that when a matter is deferred, the onus really should be on the petitioner, and it should be at their cost because they're making that decision to defer their matter. The onus should now be on them to take the affirmative steps to notify, particularly the direct abutters, if not by certified mail, by old school going out there and leafleting the neighborhood again. So we eliminate the hocus pocus of, hey, what happened to the hearing? Oh, it got deferred. Oh, okay, great. Do you know when the next hearing is? No, but we'll probably get something in the mail, or we'll hear about it. And then they take a couple weeks off, or they go away for a vacation. They come back and the matter was approved, and they're sitting there scratching their head saying, well, how did that happen? Like, so that has to stop. And I think the mechanism is requiring the petitioners themselves to take on that burden, if you will, or the expense of just notify the neighbors when they get the new date. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple stuff. We don't do it. It's a head scratcher. So that's been a long-standing issue that dates back to the Menino administration that I think needs to be addressed ASAP. And also, obviously, we want to have a diversity of thought. We want to make sure we're eliminating conflicts, but we also don't want to have a situation where we have so many board members, it's like herding cats, because they play an important role and it's an important function, and getting to a decision and getting to consensus is important. And I think having a board that has diversity of thought, but is also very streamlined and focused. And my experience has been sort of the larger the boards, the more complicated and the more hectic. These decisions need to be made in a relatively short period of time so that folks can move forward. We want to make sure that we're open for business. We want to encourage investment. We want to keep people working. We want to move projects forward. We're a city that continues to be on the move. We boast of the best colleges, universities, network of hospitals and community health centers, where CEOs and companies are moving to Boston to tap into the intellectual capital, a livable, workable, safe city. So all of that good mojo is good for Boston. And a lot of that happens. I see Commissioner Dion Irish is on here. The volume of traffic that he is seeing over at 1010 Mass Ave, not necessarily a bad thing for Boston, particularly as we're trying to dig out from the effects of COVID. We need to get things going again. So I just want to emphasize new notices need to go out so that you take that appearance of something shady happened, and it's a no-brainer, and put the onus on the petitioner. And also just make sure that we're giving a lot of thought to a board that, again, has diversity of thought throughout the different sectors, but we really have to streamline it. And I'm on board, obviously, if we have to limit the terms or have folks rotate off like other boards. So I appreciate the time and attention. Appreciate all the work you guys do. I see Ed Colburn's on here, probably one of our best municipal employees that knows this line of work probably better than anybody, along with other dedicated municipal employees. So happy to add my voice, but they're just long-standing issues that have yet to be addressed. And notice is huge for residents. You don't have to vote for it, against it, but at the very least, you don't want to feel that someone tried to pull one over on you, or they deferred and then they snuck it through. And that's kind of what happens. And if we can eliminate that portion of it and restore a little more confidence and transparency into the process, I think that goes a long way in maybe addressing some of the bigger issues. But I caution against a 13-member or 15-member or 21-member board. I think that would be a reference like herding cats. So that's it. Thank you, Madam Chair, and look forward to hearing to some of the responses as to how we're going to deal with notice on a deferral and sort of what the ultimate number of board members will be.
Very well, Councilor Flaherty. And both, I think, have to do with the home rule petition. And for your opinions, especially about the numbers, duly noted, you think 13 is too much.
That's correct. Yeah, we're trying to get to, I mean, if you think about the issues, Madam Chair, it's like, it's height, it's density, it's transportation studies and traffic. It is,
Yes, I'm trying to get.
So I would suggest under 13.
Under 13.
I think between 7 and 9 is probably appropriate. 7 would be my preference.
Okay. I'm asking as the scrivener, so that's why I'm asking this directly to you.
Also would need alternate members in the event of folks sick or on vacation.
Very, very well. And I have other questions for my colleagues to answer as well, but just to keep going so everyone can have his thought. Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach?
Yeah. Hi, Madam Chair. I think my only question at this point would just be, and I don't know if this was where we were going to go next in the conversation, but I would love to hear from the administration sort of what their counter proposal is about seats to add to the ZBA, and kind of, where that's the main thing I wanted to ask about, besides what my colleagues.
That is absolutely the next step, Councilor Bach. Absolutely next step.
If that's where we're going, then I'd like to get there, so I won't ask further questions. Thanks.
Okay. I know that there were some questions about notice from Councilor Flaherty to the administration, specifically on this executive order. And if you feel free to answer that. I understood that the notice and deferrals could be electronic and be, live as the decisions are made. They could be sending out those emails or within hours of that. But please, if you can elaborate on the executive order and how it's gonna change notice, Commissioner or whomever.
Yeah, so Chris, I'll ask you to take that, but I do have a follow-up question just so I can understand. Are we also thinking about deferrals that are caused by not having a fully seated board? Because, like, for example, this past Tuesday, we had about 50% of the cases were deferred because they were, they weren't 7 board members sitting, and that's something that's entitled to all the applicants when we don't have a fully seated board. So do you also envision that that requirement of having applicants provide notice to abutters in that scenario as well?
For me and for what I think, I actually disagree a little bit from Councilor Flaherty in that, yes, notice is important, but I don't believe the onus should be on any moving party. If the process and the venue is controlled by the city, then the ability for people to have due process should also be controlled by the city. So notice is, I believe, on the city's part. All notice about anything, whatever deferral, whatever the reason for the deferral, should be coming from the city. And the subsequent date for when the matter will be deferred to should also be coming from the city.
Madam Chair, just a footnote, I don't disagree with that. I just want, whether it's what cost associated, that should be potentially passed on to the petitioner, particularly if they were the ones that recommended the deferral. So I'm in agreement in the fact that the city is in the best position to notify folks. Yes. And if the argument against doing that is, well, it's costly and postage and everything else, well, then they should pass that through to the petitioner as part of the application process.
Correct, but that was my intention. So
I think we're aligned.
Very well. So back to Commissioner Irish.
So we'll take that under advisement, but Chris, if you could just speak to what we already have in plan in terms of what notifications we envision being available when we implement the new system.
Certainly. So the goal is to have real-time information about each project available on our web, with hopefully the ability for folks to sign up for information about an individual project or regular notices about hearings in general or geographic location. So, broken down by neighborhood, if you'd like updates on whether or not something's been deferred, approved, etc. So we're envisioning the ability to be notified about individual projects as they move through the process, as well as summary information following a vote or a decision.
And I assume that would also be captured in the quarterly or whatever annual reports of summarizing all the variances given out by the neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Very well. Councilor Flaherty, did that answer your question about notice? Councilor Flaherty? He may have had to go. Councilor, I see him. He may be having technical difficulties. Very well. I'm going to, unless anyone has any additional questions specifically on the executive order and updates, I do appreciate the updates coming in. We did pause the questioning on the Sullivan-Worcester report of the 42 recommendations. Is there any summary or at least some response to some of the recommendations that the city has or hasn't responded to in the Sullivan-Worcester report?
Sure, I can quickly give an update on if I go through by number, if you'd like.
Councilor Wu, is that okay right now?
Yes, you're the best, Chris. Thank you.
Sure. So in section A, we are in the planning to add additional meetings quarterly to get through the backlog. Right now, we're dealing with the COVID-related backlog, but we're looking to expand the number of hearings moving forward, just so we have an additional night of hearings. On number 4, we are working with the Groundwater Trust on some updates to the code that will hopefully be in progress in the fall, so September, to make changes to the GCOD requirements. In section B,
Chris,
yes.
Just to stop you very quickly, sure. I apologize. We should reiterate what page we're on. We just went right back to, for those who may just have signed on, We're in the Sullivan-Worcester report, looking at the summary documents or the summary of the 42 recommendations. On page, what page is it on?
I think it's page 18.
Page 18. Thank you very much. Please continue. I apologize.
Sure. Section B, the lower threshold for disclosing beneficial interests and the limitation on members to have business dealings. Both of those were accomplished, I think, by the executive order. In section C, so right now we're not having meetings in hearing room 801. So some of the physical changes there, I think, are somewhat on hold since we're not holding the hearings in public. But I know that the sound quality has been worked on in room 801, and they've taken a lot of steps, the property management division, to improve that, both the sound and the technology there. The waiting area further down in the hallway, that's item number 11. That is the goal, to have that once we start having hearing in person again in the future. Section D, digitizing the filing process, that is in progress. Plan circulation electronically, number 14, that's also in process. Number 15, we do have a dedicated IT support for ISD. We've hired additional staff and we're expanding our internal IT department. Number 16, we are communicating pretty much by email right now with applicants, but all of our notices are being sent digitally, as well as hard copy in the mail for notices and requirements that way. Item number 17 is email notice that's provided. Number 18, electronic access to plans for board members in the advance of hearings, that is implemented. Number 19, 20, both of those have been implemented. Number 21, we will move on that once we have in-person hearings again, and posting written decisions on the board's website. That's in progress as well. Under section E, I think the trainings that were contemplated in the executive order are in progress, both in ethics and just procedural trainings. So those items are all covered by our executive order. In section F, we have items 29, 30, 31 have all been completed. We're posting positions, so those are all in progress, I would say, rather than completed. Item number 33 is in progress, so we will be rearranging where the ZBA staff sits. Moving forward, where there's some changes happening inside 1010 related to animal care and some office reorganization, so that's also in progress. Where are we? Items number 34 and 35 are both in progress. Item H, section H, item number 36. I think we have some work to do there. And then section I, item number 39 is in process. Item 40 and 41 and 42 are all in process.
Thank you. On my informal tally, it looks like majority of things are either in progress or being implemented. Right. I'll have Christine and I will go through the list to make sure we have an understanding of what is outstanding. Sure. I want to be clear, though, I did not understand that this report was a requirement or that the administration agreed to all of this. This was an advisory consultant outside report, and I met with the two attorneys who helped to write it, and I did not agree with all of their recommendations either. They had also, lowering zoning standards and making sure it was easier to pass things through the ZBA as one of the recommendations. So I do appreciate that you've agreed to certain things, but I do think it's important, as you are going to agree or disagree with anything in this report that has not been publicly, back and forth and vetted, the administration be very open about that. And I appreciate Councilor Wu asking these questions so we can see.
Certainly.
Councilor Edwards, just to your point, you're correct. This was not a report that blanket. It was accepted. A lot of the things, I think it was raised at the last hearing, are things that really require broader conversations, including with the community. And that's, so you're correct in that understanding.
And I would add, like, one such item is the removing G-card from the Board of Appeal process. There's arguments on both sides that it's good for transparency to have it as a part of the Board of Appeal process, and some may argue that it takes up time on the agenda. So that's just one example.
Also, the report also conflicts with some of the recommendations from my home rule petition. So I don't agree with some parts as well. They don't agree with me either. So in any event, in any event, again, I want to thank Councilor Wu for bringing that up. I didn't think to go through that number, and I appreciate that, Councilor Wu. Just finally, before we go to the actual ZBA or to the home rule petition, the trainings will also involve any updates on cannabis regulations as well for the ZBA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. I wanted to make sure that was part of the trainings.
Sure.
All right, so now going into the heart of the matter, the proposed zoning home rule petition, and the three buckets where I find where there is either no opinion or there's no that are specifically not addressed by the executive order is the board composition, the standard for a variance, and term limits. So I don't know what the administration would like to do in terms of responding to any of those things or recommendations that the board has, or excuse me, that the administration has.
I'll jump in here. I just want to reiterate that I view this in my mindset for this particular discussion today is that this is a working session. So
Correct.
I would say with respect to the positions, we do feel strongly that there is a need for architect position on the board. But we do agree that I think it would be an added benefit to have a position that has a city planning perspective and also an environmental perspective.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about removal of any of the board current positions at all?
You want to take this on?
Sure. I think our position on that, Counselor, and I think we discussed this prior, is, whatever we send up to the legislature, we really want to position it for success.
Right.
We do feel that there's a need for technical expertise on the board, and that a lot of those slots that currently occupy still have value. Again, to not invite unnecessary opposition, we feel like we can get to a better place by adding additional expertise to the board along the lines that Commissioner Irish just described.
Was there any thought about having somebody who is a zoning law expert, or had renter's perspective or homeowner perspective? There's lots of different perspectives there. And I'm very, first of all, great. We agree on at least two perspectives that certainly should be part of the board. So that's good. We environmentalist and city planner, but was any thoughts to that? And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to talk about the composition of the board and any questions they have.
Yeah, and definitely there are thoughts about there's a lot of different perspectives that we need to have on the board, and different ways to accomplish having those lenses, whether it's through policy or through people who are actually sitting on the board. But
Right.
we also believe that the board shouldn't be unwieldy. We need to have, maybe if we added a position or two, we think that would be sort of the max of what the board would look like. So, prioritizing what we thought would be most beneficial, we are in agreement on those two positions.
So you see the board expanding to 9.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm not here to make that
No,
commitment. We're here to have that
typically,
conversation. Yeah.
2 positions, it would take the board to a maximum of 9.
Yes.
Okay. To my colleagues, in order of arrival, Councillor, I think Flynn may not be here, but Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone. I just need to hop off, but wanted to say thank you, especially to Chris, for making that happen on a quick turnaround. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor Wu.
Thanks, Counselor.
Counselor Braden?
I really hear the concerns about making the board too large, but I think diversifying the expertise is really important. The existing board is pretty heavy on labor representation, which I absolutely support labor representation, but maybe if we're limited in the actual number of places, we may have to do a little adjustment there. And I'm not, I don't have a vested interest. I think having a homeowner or community affordable housing expertise would be really helpful.
Very well. Is that it on just the composition, Counselor Braden?
I agree with this, the term limits. I think up to 3 terms would be good. I would like to know more about the standard for variance, because the issue of variances is huge out here. We have some projects that are just asking for so many variances and that are getting granted, and I just really am trying to get my head around what's the standard, and figure out if we need to do more intervention to get a handle on that in a different forum from this. Thank you.
Very well. I understand. Counselor Sabi George.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions at this point. Thank you.
Counselor Flaherty, you're still with us?
No, yeah, just to reaffirm, obviously diversity of thought in acumen and specialty is important, but obviously we got to come to decisions on important matters, and I think the larger the board, the harder it would be to manage, and the harder it would be to come to consensus, and they play a critical function in our city. So I want to be able to balance, having sort of a wide selection of occupations and personal and professional experience, but also need to caution against having an unwielding board that is like herding cats. So striking that balance is important, and obviously just the initial point I made that notice is important to direct abutters and to community folks so that they don't feel that the cake was baked. But other than that, appreciate the time and everyone's work on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't know, before you go, Counselor Flaherty, I did have, and it looks like
Yes.
Attorney John does as well have a question, but I wanted to ask what your thoughts were about the 2 proposed positions from the administration, a city planner and environmentalist. Did you think there was another or any other perspective you think should be as required in this home rule?
I can give it a little more thought.
Okay.
We have, I think, someone with sort of architectural engineering. I mean, you think about what happens when they submit the plans. We clearly need an architect or structural engineer to review the plans and to advise fellow members of the board. There's a legal piece of it. There's clearly real estate and a housing piece to it. You obviously want community voice on there. If you think about the great efforts that this administration and us as a body are doing around climate resiliency, that's clearly a big piece. And I think Councilor Flynn, I know he's not on, but he's in all the projects that we've been working on together. It's about transportation and around pedestrian safety and that type of stuff. So having someone that has a background in the environment and transportation is critical, I think, to the things that we're seeing on a regular basis. So yeah, so I'd be open to a number of different sectors.
Attorney Tao.
John told Counselor Edwards, that's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Don't worry about it.
Morning, John. How are you?
How are you, Counselor? I just want to speak to that point, Counselor. We have tried to give a lot of thought to what finding that appropriate balance in terms of just the size of the board, so that it doesn't become unwieldy, that we do permit enough voices, recognizing that this is a board that by design welcomes all public input. But you want to have that expertise reflected. So we're really, we're thinking about that hard, and we're happy working with all of you on that. But the additional benefit of expanding it is just the efficiency of the board. as the commissioner and Chris English have laid out, we do have a backlog of cases pre-COVID and now the COVID cases. It's a lot of work, and being able to see a quorum and avoid delays and putting things off would be a huge benefit. So just from a practical standpoint, I just want to make that point. But thank you.
Very good. Good
Thank
to talk to you,
you.
John.
Counselor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, so I would say I certainly would support the addition of both an environmentalist voice and an urban planning voice on the board. I do want to flag, and I know this has come up in some of our discussion today and in the past, that it seems to me that the more you have competent experts on your board bringing their expertise, the more important it is that the board have the documents related to the cases sufficiently in advance that they can actually use that expertise and the public can benefit from it. I know Councillor Flaherty was just referencing the need for, for the board to be a manageable side in order to have those conversations and reach consensus. But it also seems like, based on a number of things I've seen and reports I've heard, that sometimes the board is adjudicating matters that there's been relatively little prior preparatory time for board members for. And I just want to flag that because I think we just have to recognize that the point of adding expertise is to have that expertise then actually be used in this process, right? So that seems to me pretty critical. But I think those are two good additions. I also, like Councillor Edwards, would be interested in someone with a kind of housing perspective, and specifically a sort of affordability, fair housing perspective, because it's such a critical issue in the city. And I think what we're trying to do with the fair housing zoning amendment is to look at structural ways to just build those considerations in more. And so I do think something along those lines would be good. I was wondering, and this is, I don't know if Commissioner Irish or Chris or anyone can just fill me in a little bit on, we currently have, I know you gave Councillor Wu the sort of current appointments. I was confused because when I looked at kind of past legislation, what I thought was the Enabling Act, it was for 11 commissioners. And I'm just trying to understand what the current formal number in the Enabling Act is. And Councillor Edwards might know this answer too.
So right now, the statutory Enabling Act has 7 members plus 7 alternates. So each category of appointee has a full member and an alternate. So in theory would be a total of 14 appointees. But right now it's, between alternates and active members, we have 6.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's helpful. I guess I was looking at an old version then. Do you know when we last amended the Enabling Act?
I do. Let's see. I believe it was in 1993 was the last time there was substantial changes made to the enabling legislation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's strange. I'll have to, well, it's fine. I've got a version that I thought was up through 2001 that has 11 commissioners.
That's what I have too, Councilor.
Yeah, I think perhaps it's not 14 because maybe there aren't alternates for the mayors at large appointments or something. Is that something? Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So, but I don't want to do. Although a working session, it's good to work. I don't need folks to wait for me to read through this right now. But yeah, just would love to make sure that we're really considering the possibility of adding somebody with that housing expertise into the mix as well. That strikes me as important. And so, and I don't know whether, and I also think just maybe for me, what I have to do a little bit more homework on, and obviously this is I'm new to the weeds of this issue, is just the considerations that the mayor takes into account in appointing the at-large members, and whether there's a space there for the conversation about sort of renters and homeowners and such.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, because that seems like another place to kind of, where you could be considering a bunch of factors, but that could be one of them. And So,
Right.
so forgive me for not coming with an iron tight proposal on that front, but that's sort of where my thinking is I think the two proposed by the administration are great. In line with Councilor Edwards' proposal, I think we should keep talking about the possibility of adding some housing expertise. And I think looking at sort of renter and homeownership identity in connection to the mayor's at-large spots might make sense. So I'll leave my comments there, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to ask the administration some thoughts about maybe some compromise approach to this in terms of the position. So we very likely will not agree on the exact positioning at this point. And I got an excellent letter, I want to say, from a woman from Rosendale. I can't remember, Christine sent it out. It was a really good letter, but a lot of what she was noting is that these conversations, especially about the positions, she would want more robust conversation in the community level about these positions. And I respect that. So what a compromise that might be worth that, allowing for continued conversation, but also allowing for us to move this forward, is to look at the two that are proposed by the administration, but also to look at language within the home rule petition that allows for Boston to add the seats on its own going forward. By that, I mean any opportunity to stop having the State House, having to go back to the State House to make an amendment on certain components of our laws, I think is a good thing. We're doing it with linkage, for example, right? Where we're essentially asking for us to be able to make the decision on our own. And I think it would make sense going forward. We can continue this conversation if we could pass this with kind of the compromise positions that we can work on. And I still would like a third, but we can work on what that compromise is, but allow for legislation that kind of allows for Boston to continue this conversation. Because I do believe how we grow, how we look, how we build changes, and it shouldn't, and unfortunately, in order to get a home rule petition to adjust for that change every single time is not realistic. But I do think we should be at least able to have that conversation, begin and end that conversation in Boston. So I can work on the language. I don't have it right now. But if that's a proposal that makes sense to the administration, basically go with what we can agree on now, keep the seats now, but allow for Boston, the city council, the mayor, the community to decide at a later date what additional seats or what seats are or no longer necessary.
You, Counselor, can I ask for clarification? Are you talking about with the legislature that Boston would be able to redefine the categories that are currently in? Or are you talking about going from 9 to Boston retaining the authority to go to 11, for example?
I'm talking about Boston being able to define who is on the ZBA for Boston in whatever format, the number and the positions and perspectives that will be brought, and asking for that final permission from the State House in this act as a compromise. And I just think, maybe it's the city council and me, and it's exhausting sometimes to always have to ask folks who don't live in Boston and some don't even represent parts of Boston about what their thoughts are about how we're going to build here. And I think that there's a compromise language that we put in, kind of a hook to allow for us, essentially kind of an enabling local option, if you will, for us to be able to define how the ZBA looks. And that's all it can do. It won't give us out, we would still have to come up with the whole process for that. We would still have to come up with something that is, I think, constitutional, allows for due process, and allows for the proper pushback that it needs to. But that we may not have to go back is my thought. I thought that was a compromise because there are a lot more positions that I think about right now, right? And the administration may just disagree. So I think we move with what we can agree on, and then allow for a real, honest, open debate in Boston for Boston. That's my thought.
This is, obviously it's a first time hearing of it. I from the very beginning, Counselor, I've really enjoyed working with you, and I enjoy the fact that you're always trying to find a way forward. I really respect that a lot. It's something that obviously, I mean, if you're going to, we'll look at that and consider it. I don't know what that looks like, and I would have to really sit down and take some time to think about that and what that would mean. I know the one thing, as I've said before, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but the mayor really wants to send something to the State House that he feels is going to have a solid chance of passing. So like I said, let us take that back, but let's have that conversation. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. To my colleagues, Councillor Bach, Councillor Sabi George, Councillor Braden, what are your thoughts about that kind of compromise? A point where we may not come to complete agreement right now, but wouldn't it be nice that it, when we do and when we have it, it's in Boston, and Boston can just make the decisions going forward. That's the goal, kind of like what we do with linkage. If it passes, we'll be able to turn it up or turn it down based on our studied understanding of what needs to happen in our development. So that's to my colleagues. I'm trying not to let perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm not going to agree with certain things right now. I'm just putting it out there, but I do believe process and the ability for us to control our future is important. I see Councillor Braden has her hand raised.
I agree. I feel that having that capacity to be able to change the confirmation of the structure of the board to meet the needs that we had in Boston without having to go cap in hand to ask the state to help to change things is very important. I'm just getting to appreciate the frustration of this process of having to the home rule process. It is really frustrating. Like we're like adolescents who need to go to Papa to get permission to do things. It's really crazy. But yeah, so I appreciate that, and I really feel that adding some more breadth and to the board itself is really important. I think the two suggestions from the administration, the city planner, and the environmental representation would be would really add to it. But I think the housing, someone with a fair housing or with housing background, from the point of view of just trying to advocate and push for housing, I think it brings that really important perspective to the board as well, if we can get that on. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Asabi George, in order, if you have any thoughts.
No, I agree with that sentiment. I think that is a really good approach for us to take.
Thank you. Councillor Bach?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm strongly in favor of us taking as much control of our internal city operations from the State House as possible, always. I think that politically, to the administration's point, I think that if we tried to send a home rule up that gave us carte blanche to change it from this point forward, some of the same interests that would object to us removing seats will object to the possibility of us removing those seats through that carte blanche. So I would think that in order to pass something through, we might have to do something like we give ourselves the right to define up to this number of extra seats, like with, where we're leaving the categories open, but we're explicitly not taking the capacity to remove seats from sort of existing interests on the board. I mean, that's just my political analysis right off, but it's just off the bat, I think, again, something to discuss. I did want to flag while I was sitting here, I did do a little more reading, and it seems like even in the existing statute, so for instance, there are 3 people appointed by the mayor at large, and it said, and it says, okay, he appoints 3 people at large. At least one of them needs to be an owner occupant of like a small dwelling, and at least one of them has to be a small business owner of a business that has 50 or fewer employees. And then, but it doesn't actually have any condition like that for the sort of third hypothetical at large. So it seems to me really low hanging fruit would be to say one of the last third at large person should rent. And it seems like it's in a similar category as those other 2 requirements, the owner occupant and the small business owner. And then I just was curious, and this is a clarification question, and forgive me if I didn't understand this before, but could the administration clarify, do we have these 3 neighborhood organization commissioners on the commission at the moment?
We have two, don't we? We have Joe Ruggiero is one.
Right. Okay.
Ed DeVoe would be, no, actually,
Oh, two vacant alternate positions for the neighborhood organization representatives.
So, and allow me to ask just a clarifying question about that. So when you say alternates, like the statute provides for a commission of 11 zoning commissioners, and it doesn't say anything about.
So the difference between the zoning commission and the zoning board of appeal.
right.
Oh, that's right. Right. That's right.
Right.
Yep. That's right.
So the
Okay.
board of appeal has 7 full members and 7 alternates.
So then that's my confusion, right? As I'm looking at the
Okay.
those at-large selections are for the commission, not the board of appeal. That makes sense. I mean,
Okay.
it makes sense. We should probably change it, but it is how it is. Okay, cool. I'll do more reading in advance. But yeah, I would just say that I definitely I think the idea from Councilor Edwards of moving forward with what we agree on and seeing what wiggle room we could provide ourselves for further changes later without going back with a home rule would make sense. But I think we probably have to tailor that wiggle room if we want to actually send something up that we can get through. So those would be my comments. Thanks, Madam Chair.
I appreciate that. So, we can work on what that language looks like. I think you are, oh, Councilor Braden, you raised your hand again. You're on mute.
In terms of public perception, when you go on the website and you look at the board, it'd be really important to tag what the bio and the affiliation of the different and the expertise of the different members of the board, so that they could, members of the public could say, oh, this guy's an architect or so that you have a city planner or whatever their designation or their expertise is, so that you get a better understanding of the actual the range of expertise on the board from the public's perspective. It might be a way to increase confidence in their decision making if we knew who they were. If you're an outsider, you don't know who they are. They're just
Right.
people on the board. Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that's a technical thing. We don't need to put it in the home rule petition. Is that something the administration would be willing to do?
Absolutely. I think we can do that administratively.
It's a bio section basically, so we understand what perspective, how we're complying with the zoning or with the law. I think that's good. Thank you, Councilor Braden. So moving on to the next big section where I think we also are balancing, trying to respond to how variances are given out. Also balancing with there is not agreement on changing the standard for a variance. Be very transparent to my colleagues, and also trying to get something passed at the State House. So I'll just start with this might be, and I did get, and being totally transparent, we got an email today, a very comprehensive email saying, if you're going to touch the standard for a variance and make it part of the zoning code, that should be a prolonged, longer public conversation. I think my colleagues got that email from the woman from Rosendale, right? And that was one of her thoughts, and I don't disagree with her. So I'll just put it out here again, is this may be another opportunity for us to be able to, again, discuss at some point, put in something, placeholder language saying that the current standard is X. Boston at a later date may consider through a blank process, changing the variance standard. So that we're not stuck on, I mean, I'm putting out to my colleagues, this is not like a contentious disagreement. It's a lot of stuff I'm asking to be considered for the variance. And I think it's important to consider all things, impacts on the city planning goals, this impacts on affirmatively furthering fair housing, all of these different things I think should be part of the conversation. Now, the good thing is, my understanding, we can make those parts of the conversation by who's on the board, but also by the way the public has testimony and thoughts and concerns. We can make conversation, okay? How which a project is judged is what I'm also trying to change. And so, again, if we're talking about perfection not being the enemy of the good and perfection not being the enemy of progress to get something up there, might it make sense to have that compromise language? This is my question to the administration and to my colleagues, if that makes sense. Just know it kills me. To the thought of it kills me. I'm dying a little inside, but I am also trying to get something done. So just know that it's painful.
Counselor, I would love to just chime in and say, the detailed standards for granting of a variance are itemized out in the zoning code, which we don't need state legislation to change. And we can do that through a process with the zoning commission. So I think it's section 7C in the zoning code that details those standards. That's something that can be done through a zoning commission process rather than having to go to the legislature for it.
But is the granting of a variance part of the zoning code?
So I think
because I don't think that's the issue, right? It's what we consider, right, for granting zoning is one thing, but when the person's saying I want an exception to that rule, I don't believe that that's part of the zoning code. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think the board, the ZBA, they're empowered to grant variances to the zoning code. So that's how itemized in the statute. And then the regulation of what they use to consider the granting of a variance is listed in the zoning code, which would more, rather than you look at it like the ability to grant the variances is the law. The standards they use to grant those variants are the regulation.
And that's in 7C?
I believe so.
We can bring that up. I'm wondering if someone can get 7C over to us for this working session. I'm trying to keep us to about 2 hours. So if we can get 7C and make sure we're clear about where the variance standards are. My understanding it was a substantial hardship, and looking at the topography, there's like 4 things that they're supposed to say. And you're saying those 4 things are already in the zoning code.
Yep, section 7C, conditions required for a variance. Is subsection A, special circumstances or conditions, but including but not limited to exceptional narrowness, shallowness, shape of lot, exceptional topographical conditions, etc. Reasons of practical difficulty and substantial hardship. Granting of a variance to be in harmony with general purpose and intent of the code, and a specific itemized number for development impact projects. So those are in the zoning code rather than in the statute, as I read it.
Okay. Section 80B7. This is not under Article 80.
Article 7.
7.
Sorry, I called it section 7-3, but it's Article 7, section 7-3.
Does everyone have this? Does anyone need this in front of them?
I think it would be helpful, yes, if we could send it. Or where I might find it.
I have a link. I'll forward it to you. And
I just sent a link to the email chain, Christine.
Excellent. All right, so I pulled up Article 7. Variances, authorization under the acts, procedural for appeal. That's how. So the BPDA basically submits within 30 days after the transmittal of the report to the ZBA, looking at all of these standards and whether they should be granting a variance or not. Am I correct, Chris?
Right, so there's two aspects of it. One is the procedure, and that's what the board, the BPDA uses to make their recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And then in section 7-3, it's the Board of Appeal should grant a variance only if it finds that the following conditions are met. So those are what they use to grant the actual variance. Their authority to grant the variances, I think, is defined in the statute, but
not the standard for them, which is here.
Right.
So I'll just note for some of my colleagues, I don't see financial hardship being one of them. And I will say that that's been one of the biggest frustrations is that is used by a lot of developers and folks that it can't make the numbers work as a quote. And so this is great. So the issue I think is mute in terms of this home rule petition. I think we still need to look at this standard, and we can probably through another process now look at that standard. I think my colleagues agree on that. Am I correct, Kenzie?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's one thing. But two, if this is the standard, I don't hear anybody on the ZBA ask these kinds of questions. I don't see it. And that might be a lot of having to do with the training that they need to have, the time that they need to have to review, right? And also in general, I think we need to talk about more of the standards in general that come into this. But this is extremely helpful. Thank you, Chris. This was great. Or attorneys, maybe whoever, or commissioner, whoever just said this. But I do hope that there is a commitment also to review these standards. I'm seeing 1970 in here as maybe the last time the standards may have been amended, or either way, I think it's worthy of a 2020 vision, don't you?
certainly.
Councilor Bach, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree. I think that I think that the conversation about the standard for variance is one that that is at the heart of a lot of folks' frustration around the city on all sides, right? About predictability and expectations. And to Councilor Edwards's point, I think that reforming it would be something that would involve a real public conversation. But it's good to know that that conversation is perhaps more in our hands than we thought, vis-a-vis the question of, what goes up to the state and what doesn't. I just wanted to flag quickly on the sort of composition of the board point before we wrapped up, having had a little bit more time to catch up now. Just that I would appreciate if the administration would consider the question of, obviously for a board like this, you want to have an odd number of people for decision-making purposes. And so I wonder if, in addition to the environmentalist and the urban planner, we could think about whether the administration would be open to adding somebody with housing expertise as the fifth person in place of the at-large seat, since that's the one existing seat that isn't pulled from a particular constituency at the moment. I think that would be a good conversation point for us. And then I wonder if we could talk about, we have these two residential neighborhood organization members, whether it could make sense to say at any given time, one of them needs to be a owner occupant and one of them needs to be a renter, or if that's too exclusive, right? Whether we're saying something like, hey, we've got all these different appointed, people, but at least somebody on the board needs to be a renter. And I'd be interested in sort of thinking through how we could graft something like that on here. So those are just my two other comments on the board composition. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Attorney.
Council will absolutely take those under consideration. Absolutely. We'll think about those. And just for the record, Councilor Edwards, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on TV every once in a while.
I thought, my apologies.
It looks like one.
Well, last hearing, I made everyone a counselor. Everyone became a city councilor. I just added that to their title. So my apologies.
Okay.
So the third part, if we can, now that I think we've resolved the conditions for the variance, that's a different conversation. We're thinking about some compromise language for the composition of the board to move it. The third part was about term limits. And I don't know if this is the appropriate venue for that, the home rule petition, or if there's another way to do it. But I do think it's worthy of the conversation of how many times a person can be reappointed to the board.
You know, I think at the last hearing, this was raised, and I think we indicated that the mayor is absolutely open to that conversation. It had not, it's funny because as much as I keep talking about, you know, if we can take things in our own hands and position this bill for success at the State House, that's how we should do it. The idea that this could be accomplished through either executive order, that's something that until you raised it, it hadn't really occurred. So I'd like an opportunity to go back and kind of look at that. You know, I will say, yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, this is something we're going to look at, and we'll move on it fast.
Do we have an agreement for what the term limits could be? I was saying no more than 3.
I don't know on that. I would have to go back and talk with some other folks and find out where they would stand on that. And I also want to be, you know, I want to, you know, just be very transparent with, you know, we have a backlog right now. We do think experience counts. And we want to make sure that, you know, how we structure this so that we're not just jettisoning all the experience. So we want to, however, if for example, the mayor is open to term limits, that this is done in a rational way. Like I said, we'll go back and we'll take a look at that.
I don't know where the terms, even the 3-year terms, are provided for. Maybe that would help us in understanding which appropriate vehicle is the one that needs to be amended. I don't know if it's in the home rule or in the current law right now that it's a 3-year term, or was that created by the administration?
Term is set by statute, but the statute does not speak to number of terms that somebody can serve. It's
So it
silent
looks
on
like
that.
the statute would need to be amended.
Potentially. I'm not quite sure. And I'd like to talk to some lawyers about that. It may be within our reach that we just do it ourselves. So, but like I said, I'd like to have some conversation with our corporation counsel and some other folks and see what we can take into our own hands there and see what's doable.
Okay. I appreciate the work on this, the back and forth and the executive order as well. My other question would be a matter of practicality. And this is, you again can correct me on the effectiveness of an executive order. I understand that they are as effective as the executive and how they're enforced by that executive. But if this, you know, if we have a new administration or 10 years from now, the executive order from the Walsh administration, is it only as good as when the Walsh administration is in power to enforce it? Or does it bind other ones? Because if it is only limited to the current administration, then why wouldn't we make this a statute so it's permanent? The things we agree on even.
I don't know technically the answer to that, how long and binding the mayor's executive order is. I don't know the answer to that, Counselor.
Okay, I will, Christine and I, that's city council counselor, attorney for the city council, and I can go through the analysis of the, you know, the enforcement, because, you know, when I think about the now, but I also think about what we're binding people to in the future. And I don't want hard work now to be just for this moment and this time, you know, 10 years from now to be totally undone. So this is not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. It's a matter of how do we make sure this is permanent?
I'd just like to add that, you know, in general, the analysis is that changing a statute is a very high bar. It's a heavy lift. So if we can accomplish the goals in other ways without doing that, then we always do that in an analysis agenda.
Agreed. And I think that it helps immediately with the acute pain of a lot of people and their concerns right now. But my question is more like, how do we make sure this is permanent? If it requires a statute to make it permanent or not. So I will check in with Christine about that or not. I would hope that everything we agree on could be in a statute if necessary to make it permanent. Only the stuff we agree on. So that's where my headspace is now. The final product, what it needs to look like to make sure this is done. So 11:56, I'm under my 2 hour.
Can I add one more
It's
thing?
lunchtime for a lot of folks, and I want to thank Councilor Braden and Councilor Bach, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Flaherty, and Councilor Flynn who joined us today. I don't have any, well, I will give some update conclusory remarks, but I'll turn it over to Councilor, Commissioner Irish, you raised your hand.
Yes, one more point. I would invite everyone to take a look at Board of Appeal hearings, particularly the last several weeks of hearings. You will see some thoughtful discussion. The standards that we mentioned prior, you'll see that they reference standards quite often in making decisions. Now that they have a more manageable agenda, I think they're accomplishing that. So I would just leave it there without being, I'm not trying to be defensive, but I do think that if you looked at some of those hearings, that you would see that the board does a pretty good job of applying standards when they're making decisions.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do think it's, you know, anything that we're trying to change, we should at least be watching to see how it's functioning. Completely agree. So Councilor Braden, if you have any conclusory remarks, and then Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really helpful to pull this all together and a good forum to discuss the practicalities of change that we might be able to move forward. I do want to echo Councillor Edwards' comment about financial hardship. That is so often one of the reasons that a developer will come forward and push for a variance, and it really should not even be entertained as an excuse for asking for a variance. There's so many other issues at stake, and if they have overextended themselves in purchasing a property speculatively, we should not be asked to accommodate that. That's their problem. Thank you.
100% agree. Councilor Bach.
Just wanted to thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this and for your leadership on the issue, and to ISD for all the work that you're doing on the ZBA reforms and your partnership with the council on this. I really think that adding those seats that we discussed would make a lot of sense, and especially if we really create the opportunity for the members of the ZBA to bring their expertise to bear on these issues, could really, that along with some of the other reforms could go a long way to kind of establishing a track record that gave the public greater confidence in the board. And I think that we just have to remember that that's a really important goal in this whole process, is for people, you want people to feel like they have reasonable, legitimate expectations vis-a-vis consistency and transparency for government processes like these, and that they can, see public servants transparently working on their behalf. And I think that's where we've got to be trying to get. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. So I'll just conclude by saying what I started out with at the very beginning. I expect to have a finished product for our vote. By that, I mean the City Council's vote on July 29th. And so in this time, hearing the feedback, excuse me, and hearing back from my colleagues, it seems that there is consensus around a compromise on the positions, but making sure that it gets to the State House. There is an interest in allowing for us to continue conversation on our own with some sort of empowerment on this composition of the ZBA. Term limits are absolutely something we're interested in. We will follow up to determine in what vehicle is best to implement those term limits. This is something that the council and the administration are in agreement on, that they are necessary. The question is, where do we put them? I think I've summarized. And then also with regards to the standard for a variance, it will be through a public prolonged process that is looking at Section 7 and looking at the conditions required for a variance going forward. I want people to know there's been significant work and significant change for how we do business at the ZBA, which as a district city councilor, Note, the district city councilors are the only ones left on the on this call, and it's because probably we get the most calls about zoning. We absolutely do. And the process in the ZBA was in much need of improvement, of inclusion. I noted it was borderline shameful that it was only in English, knowing the diversity of our communities. And there has been an immediate response to that from the administration as early as February this year. I think I reintroduced this in January to have it executive order done by February is a direct response to some of the most pressing needs and concerns. So I do thank you for that. I do thank you for that. Where we disagree is become quite narrow. It's a matter of perspective, and I acknowledge that. And so I think we will be able to get something done and out to the State House on the 29th. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your quick response and research. This is to Commissioner Irish, to Chris, to John, and I think Ed was here the entire time, and I know he took a lot of notes.
Yes,
So,
I did. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. So if we will have some follow-up specifically around the compromise language that we think we can live with. I think we need to do that. And then the term limits would probably be the last two things to adjust, and that would be it. So thank you very much. Have a good day. 12:02. 12:02.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.